Hello to everyone watching this. My name is Heap, although you may know me from my multiple media accounts where I typically go by the name of Eragon or Eragon Shadeslayer. Now, today we're going to be going over the first series that I've always wanted to talk about in video format, which is the Inheritance Cycle. And I have in front of me the first book to the Inheritance Cycle, Eragon. Now, I've read the entire cycle a total of 13 times. This talk through I'm about to be will make the 14th time going through it, but it is a very amazing series by Christopher Paolini, and I'm very excited to sit down and talk through this format to explain why I love this series and what it goes through. There are 4 books in the series, the first being Eragon, the second being Eldest, my favorite, the third being The 7 Promises of Eragon Shadeslayer and Saphira Bjotskolar, or, as is more commonly known, Brasingra, and the 4th book being The Inheritance, or the Penultimate Battle. So, we're going to start off by going through a couple chapters at a time for the first book, Eragon. Now, in Eragon, we start off with a prologue, and then we move on to the actual chapters of the book. So in the prologue, it is called the Shade of Fear. Now, what I love about this prologue is it introduces you to a very mystical world. It doesn't quite explain everything that's going on, and so you're left in a system of wonderment and just wondering why all this is happening. So we're introduced to a shade, and he is described as being very pale with fiery red hair. Now, everyone is going to imagine their own characters in some way that suits their mind. Whenever I think of the shade, my mind thinks of the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. And that may be funny, and I always thought it was interesting because as we introduce more characters, you're going to see just how many characters I imagine in weird ways that kind of go against the way they're described. Now, along with the Shade, we are introduced to a race of brutes known as the Urgals. And the Urgals are basically described as huge hulking masses that are kind of humanoid, kind of not. And in my mind, I've always imagined them to be minotaurs, mainly because they have horns. And it's just the way that I immediately thought about them. I read Eragon immediately following the Percy Jackson series, and Minotaur was one of the main things on my mind when I was dealing with Greek mythology. But we see them in a wooded area hunting 3 elves, and these elves seem to be carrying something very precious, and they do not want to be caught, obviously. So Durza pulls a very nifty trick where he basically uses magic to immediately burn the forest and trap these elves around him. And this is very interesting. We get to to a world where magic exists, and the magic is controlled by a language called the Ancient Language. And you hear all these foreign words the moment you start in, and it's really nifty how an entire language was created for this book series. And, props to Christopher Paolini for creating such an amazing language that is fun to actually look into. There's not very many types of languages I enjoy, but besides my main one being English, but Christopher Paolini created the Ancient Language, and I love reading different phrases and stuff in the language, trying to understand what I am reading, because they actually follow a grammatical system. Now, back to the prologue, we see that there is 2 male elves and a female elf who seem to be traveling through the woods protecting some blue stone. And what happens is the Shade goes after them with his band of Urgals, and he kills the male elves, and while the Urgles are going after the male elves, he demands that they go after the female elf, saying that she is the one he wants. So the Urgles turn immediately, and they go after her, and she manages to escape the Urgles while the Shade jumps up onto a cliff, and from there he gets a vantage point of the entire wooded area. Then he casts a spell that burns a circle, and from there he causes that circle to shrink. And this is how he finds the female elf, and who he stops by jumping directly in front of her. And while he jumps down from his cliff face to stop her, she works some magic of her own, and she sends this blue stone far away from her and away from the Shade. Now, this magic seems to exhaust her because she passes out right there, and the Shade, being extremely mad, throws his sword halfway into a tree, quivering as it just wobbles there in the trunk of the tree. And as angry as he was, he also cast a spell that immediately dispatched the remaining Urgles around him. He seems to have no really care for the life around him. He just wants what his prize is. And the only other notable thing about the Shade of Fear is that his sword has a thin scratch across the blade, and that will come into play later on, so it's very important to remember. Now, we switch over to Chapter 1. Chapter 1 in this series is where we first meet Eragon, and he is a small farm boy. Now, Chapter 1, the name is called Discovery, and this is where the blue stone actually appears in front of Eragon while he is hunting some deer, and he has been tracking them for a few days. Now, Eragon is currently hunting in a thing called the Spine, which is another set of woods different from the ones that the Shade and the Elves ran. And these woods are said to be cursed, and that no person can go in these woods and stay sane for a very long amount of time. Typically they disappear, or they die, and all kinds of things happen. Well, very few hunters actually brave the Spine. Eragon, through no special means that he can see, will go into the woods, and he will manage to get out. And this is because of his diligence and paying attention to his surroundings. He is a very good hunter. And we see him track this doe, and just as he's getting ready to take the final shot and bag his game, there's an explosion. A lot of hot air whips across his face, and the deer are all startled and they run away. And in the clearing where the deer were laying down, the blue stone has appeared, and Eragon is bemused and amazed. He thought the Spine had managed to give him all its secrets, but it continues to amaze him. Now, Eragon needed that meat that the doe could have provided. His family lives far away from the nearest town, and they require the meat to survive for the impending winter that is coming. So, Eragon decides that he's going to have to call his loss and go back to the farm when he thinks about taking the stone with him because it can be of some value. Surely a stone as shiny as this one was carved by magic, and it must be extremely valuable for it to have been so flawlessly made. But he doesn't know if he was meant to have it or if it was there by accident. So he decides to take the stone with him back to his hometown, which is known as Carvajal, and eventually to his family home. So what we see is that he brings this stone with him to a butcher by the name of Sloan. Now, Sloan is a very gruff, very mad man who doesn't like Eragon, and he thinks that him traveling in the Spine is dangerous and threatening to the entire valley. Now, as we move into the third chapter, Palancar Valley, this is where we actually go into Carvajal and we meet Sloane and a few other villagers. So Eragon makes his way over to Sloane's butcher shop to purchase some meat, and as he comes in, Sloane taunts him, talking about how the great hunter has joined the mortals once more. And Eragon, ignoring this banter, requests that he gets some meat from Sloane to help make their way through the winter. And Sloane, knowing that Eragon comes from a poor family, demands to see payment. Now, Eragon says he does not have any money, and Sloane says, how is he supposed to pay for meat if he doesn't have money? So Eragon takes out the blue stone, and immediately Sloane accuses him of stealing the stone, but he looks at it as if it could be worth a little bit of money, and he tries to give Eragon a very miser amount for it, and Eragon denies it, saying that it's worth at least 10 times as much. Now, as this is happening, there is another character who is on his way over here, and once Eragon is denied the meat, and Sloane finds out that the stone comes from the spine and refuses to even touch it, that is when we meet the new character, Horst. Now, Horst, in my eyes, is like the mayor of Carvajal. He is never outright said to be the mayor, but he is the town blacksmith, and everyone seems to fear and respect him. I've always imagined Horst as being kind of like the patriarch of Carvajal, even though he is still not the oldest one there. He is like the leader of them. Now, Carvajal seems to fear Sloane enough to where when he walked into the shop, Sloane immediately started trying to come up with excuses as to why him and Eragon were arguing. So Eragon and Sloane are silenced by Horst with just a single word, and we find out that Horst is a very kind man by buying Eragon the meat that he wanted to buy to begin with, and Eragon agrees to pay Horst off by working in his forge. And as this is all happening, we meet another character who kind of slinks into the background, which is Katrina. Katrina being Sloane's daughter. And it seems like the only person in the world that Sloane cares about is Katrina, as her mother had died in the spine a few years prior to Eragon first arriving to Palancar Valley in Carvajal as it stands. So from there, Eragon lines his bag with as much meat as he can fit and agrees to work off the debt for Sloane in the upcoming spring while his son travels to finish his blacksmith apprenticeship. From there, he decides that he was going to give Katrina a message from his cousin Roran, but due to the scenario that we just went through, he gives the message to Horst, and they share a laugh as Horst explains that Katrina and Roran must be getting very serious for such an explicit message to be shared. So from there, Eragon makes his way back to his farm with his shiny blue stone and a bag full of meat, and we end off with him showing up to his farmhouse. I will cover more in another video, but I think these first 3 chapters, well, the prologue and the first 2 chapters, shows a lot that can be seen about the story already, and how they seem not to be living in an age of modern technology, but they live by farm and by trade, which is something very amazing for a series. It kind of makes it feel like we're back in the Middle Ages with it. And I enjoy the mysteriousness around the entire series, and I'm excited to get further into the details. Now, I'm having a hard time talking about the series without giving away secrets that are going to come up, but as we get farther into the series, I will be able to lower those inhibitions, because most will already be known, and more can be inferred just by guessing and reading. So thank you all for anyone who has watched this first video. I will be adding another video probably Friday. I enjoy doing, I'm going to probably do about 2 videos a week. I enjoy talking about this series. I'm not going to stop with just this series, but I'm going to go one series at a time. I actually have the whole series right here, along with Eragon, and I have another 2 series off on my bookshelf right here, which are the Dragon Watch series from the Fablehaven series, and I also have the Lord of the Rings series, which I have actually never physically read before, and I am very, very excited to get into this. That will be a true first read, along with Dragon Watch. But those will be later on. So thank you all for showing up, and I will see y'all in the next video.